please help me welcome Mickey Shapiro and Stephen Oritt. And Mickey and Stephen, here at Ebertfest, we have a tradition. We give, you know, some people say this is better than an Oscar. We give the golden thumb. And Mickey, it's my pleasure to give you the golden thumb for My Name is Sara.
Can I give you the golden kiss?
And you get one too. This is an actual cast of Roger's thumb, and it's pointing up right now. So thank you very much.
Oh, I forgot, we were supposed to take pictures with them. Okay. I forgot the photographer told us we don't look. Okay, right here. All right. And we're going to take them away. And we'll give them to you backstage. And now we'd like to welcome on the stage the moderator, Dr. Eric Pearson, and film critic Matt Zollerseis. And also, Eric, will you please introduce Dr. William Gingold?
Dr. William Gingold. Folks known to you here in San Diego, so I'm very happy to have him be part of our discussion today. Thank you all for spending some time with us this afternoon with the film. And I first want to thank the Alliance for Inclusion and Respect for bringing us all together to have this conversation. So we're going to have a couple of questions and then hopefully throw it open to the audience. I think for me in watching the film, I was really curious about the genesis of the project, sort of how it all came together.
In 2015, Mickey and a mutual friend of ours took a trip to Ukraine. I was not on this trip. I didn't even know Mickey at the time, but Mickey had always wanted to retrace Sara's steps, go to the village where she was from, the village where she hid. And our mutual friend, his name's Andy Trotter, he's another producer on the film. He has done this for a number of second-generation survivors, and he brought Mickey over there, and they spent about a week over there, about 2 weeks over there, and from this trip, a lot was illuminated. Mickey discovered a lot about Sara, as did Andy, and after that trip, Andy and I had a conversation. Andy told me about the entire experience and had the two testimonies that Sara had given, one to the Shoah Foundation and one to the United States Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. I promptly watched both of them and was just awestruck that a child was able to survive this ordeal. And I thought that it was very compelling and it was worthy of at least flying to Detroit to meet Mickey and interview Sara. And that was really the genesis of it. That really from the time that I spent there, we had some conversations and got to know each other. And about a year later, we started working on the script. Correct. Yeah, 7 years ago.
I was struck by the tone of the oppressive nature of that experience. And when I was watching it, I just felt like there was this weight that was always there, and every decision was a critical one, and every interaction was a crucial one. And I wonder if we could talk about that sort of feeling that even, and the war sort of comes into view at the end, but it's there, and I wanted to know if you felt comfortable speaking to that.
Absolutely. I'm comfortable speaking about anything. I think that for me, I am Jewish, but I did not have any direct ancestors that were lost in the Holocaust, so I have no personal experience with the Holocaust. Mickey obviously has a much different perspective, and he can talk about that with his experiences growing up, Sarah, as a mother. But I am a very emotional person, as is. I communicate in emotional language. That's how I approach my work. And I knew that the story inherently had so much emotion. Sara had to live under such emotional duress for these almost 2 years that she was on the farm. And I just couldn't really get it out of my mind how a child, she was 12 years old when she arrived at the farm. In the film, it says she was 14. She lied and aged herself up to seem more employable. And I couldn't, I have 2 young children, and I couldn't help but think, you know, how could they have gone through something like this? And so when we really started talking about the tone of the film, myself and Mickey and Andy and our screenwriter, David Himmelstein, there were 2 things that we really strived to stay away from. One was sentimentality, and the other was melodrama. And I was just confident that there was enough in the true story, and the film strays very little from the true facts, that we didn't have to really gin it up in that regard. And we really just tried to tell the story as true as possible, and not necessarily spell everything out or hit everything over the head. To me, one of the things that I'm most proud of is the nuance of the film, and that, in war, fortunately, I've never had to be in any situation like that to make these kind of decisions. I hope, none of us ever do, and you never can actually surmise how you would react in that situation until you are. And I would often hear, why did the Jews, why did they roll over so easily? Why did they go to the camps? Or why did this happen? Or, why did this person give this person away? And the truth is, no one knows how you're going to react until you're in those situations. So we tried to really just kind of focus on them being humans living in this awful existence for 2 years.
Yeah, the nuance, just to pick up, you're talking about the nuance. There is, you never know who knows what they know. And that was really powerful, particularly in the scene where the people are hanging, and you see that that's the woman that's been in the market, and you don't know what she knows and who she's protecting. I look forward to seeing the film again, because I think there's a lot more in there that I may not have gotten in the first screening, so I really look forward to actually seeing it again.
Thank you. You got a lot. The fact that you picked her out, a lot of people don't. Yeah.
I wanted to follow up on that and just ask some kind of practical questions about the filmmaking itself and how you're translating this story into images for people. How do you calibrate how much is too much when, as Eric says, you're doing a scene where you don't know what somebody knows? Like, there were a couple of moments, this is my second viewing of the film, and there were a couple of moments where I felt like I had a better sense of who knew what and when.
Takes a few scenes.
Yeah.
Well, when I interviewed Sara twice, unfortunately she was pretty sick with Parkinson's by the time that I interviewed her, so she couldn't really talk and really kind of live in too much reflection of her experience. And I would try to gently kind of pin her down on a few things because even in her testimonies there were certain things that she wouldn't disclose. And for example, I would kind of ask her the second time, do you think they knew? Did either of your employers know your real identity? And she would just, no, of course not. But in my mind,
But they did.
Yeah, they did know. And we found that out at the end. And actually, I found that out when I went to visit the village. And we stopped at a church, because that was the church she was at, and we saw a lady in a yard. And I said, I'm looking for these people, the farmer. Can you show me where the house is? And she said, yes, that's where the Jewish girl was. So they knew after, but not during. Or at least we didn't think during.
Since I have you right next to me,
You can have me.
I have to ask. Okay, so I'm kind of becoming a weird obsessive student of this movie now.
Okay.
Like, what did people know and when did they know it? Did the priest know immediately, do you think?
We don't know. I knew he knew, but we don't know exactly when. Some of the timing you have to play with.
Right, yeah, because I'm
Yeah.
still not sure if he knew immediately or
I'm
not.
not sure either.
And I'd like if Bill and Mickey could help me with this question. What do you want us to take away, or what do you think we can take away from this film here in 2023? That it's more than just a history lesson. What can we take away from it?
Isn't it
today?
funny? We have a war in Ukraine. We have anti-Semitism. We have things happening all over again, just like it did in the 40s. And you have to be very aware of what's going on in this country and the rest of the world. And that's one of the reasons we made the movie, was to show people what happens, what can happen, and how it shall not happen again.
Thank you. Bill, did you want to add something?
Well, thank you for letting me talk. First of all, I want to share with you that watching this film as just a member of the audience, it triggered a lot of emotions that I could relate to very personally to the Gingold family. The thing that struck me was the fact that this young woman, Sara, had a gift to make friends of fear. She was able to use the fear factor to motivate her to do many, many things that most of us wouldn't be able to do. And that was one of the beautiful things that I saw in this film, because many of the scenes reflect pretty much on some of the things that the Gingold family went through, maybe not in the same setting. We kind of experienced the Warsaw Ghetto for 2.5 years before we escaped. So the emotions were pretty high when I was watching the film in many aspects. And I'm not sure we have a lot of time here for me to go into a whole litany of things. So I just wanted to share that reaction to you, that the beauty of the film to me, and potentially my family that's no longer with us, is that how you can capture the idea of dealing with fear and process how you can anticipate things that might be happening and how you manage those. So, I think the whole idea of hope, resilience, anticipation, I can go on in terms of terms, but those were my personal observation. And I thank both of you for producing this film. I don't know if it'll be available for kids in schools as an example, but one of the things I do is I go to schools probably about 30 times a year and talk with them, because those are the people that we have to look to the future. And that was also a beautiful thing of the film, is it generated hope for the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to have mics out in the audience, so while we're sort of getting that sorted, so what has happened with the film since the film is about 2-3 years old? So what's that process been like with the film?
Well, the film was supposed to come out originally in theaters in June of 2020. We were poised, we were just kind of leading up to our publicity release 3 months prior, and then COVID happened. So our distributor put the film on the shelf for 2 years, and ultimately we just waited. It was a very difficult thing to do. Leading up to that point, Mickey and I did a number of film festivals internationally. We first really raised the profile of the film internationally, did a number of international film festivals that were geared mainly to younger audiences. To your point, the film connected, we found out early on, it connected with a younger Gentile audience in a way that we didn't necessarily anticipate, but I credit most of that to Susanna, our young actress, and she just being a touchstone for a younger audience. So once we kind of got some momentum internationally, then we focused on US festivals. Unfortunately, that was cut short because of COVID. The film was ultimately released in June of this past year, and we hit 28 cities in the United States. We ran until the end of September, still battling enormous attrition from COVID. Obviously, we have an older audience in the States that the film was connecting with, but a lot of our audience wasn't comfortable yet going back to theaters, even as they are now. The film then went to digital and is now available on streaming on Amazon and Apple, a number of others as well. But just quickly to also your point about educating, this was always Mickey's primary concern. It was not to sell tickets. It was to get as many people to watch this film and learn about Sara's story. Mickey is an incredibly philanthropic, passionate man about combating hate and anti-Semitism. And this film is an extension of the work that he's done for 25, 30 years. And our partner on the film, the USC Shoah Foundation, has a teaching curriculum that the film will be taught in schools, along with showing parts of the film, depending upon the age range. But it is an important thing to clearly educate and to pass these stories on. I also, though, being a father and seeing in the schools and seeing young kids, that oftentimes you get this kind of eye roll, yeah, another Holocaust story. And that was something that, again, we took with us in making this film, not to make something that was kind of overly preachy. We really wanted to show not so much about the story. I like to say is not so much about the Holocaust, it's about the collateral damage of the Holocaust and how a child was able to make the right decision one after another, and navigate these complex adult relationships in order to survive.
She was really 11 years old, all by herself. Her family had been killed. She didn't even know if they existed. She stayed in the woods for several months by herself, with only a pair of shoes and a dress. No family, no friends, no money, no laptop. It was plenty scary for an 11-year-old girl. And she survived because she was bright. And she only talked if she was asked a question. She never talked unless you asked her. And she was a smart, very wonderful, hardworking, tough lady. And that's how she survived.
Yeah, there's a great deal of this story in the silence. Just the silence of people reacting and looking at one another, and that I hadn't noticed that until you mentioned it, that she doesn't really engage people unless they're asking her something,
and that's the way she was as an adult.
When did you learn this story? And when did you feel like you really had learned this story? You probably got bits of it.
Yes. I came over in 1949 out of the DP camp. I was 2 years old. And we lived in a little house outside Detroit. And the survivors would come to our house. And I spoke Yiddish and German at 2. And I could listen to all the stories. And I heard every story you could hear. Buried alive, raped, shot, killed. You name it, I heard it. But I listened to it all my life. And she never finished the story. She would tell us, what happened to me, you don't want to know. Now, this is my mother. And how does a child ask a mother when she says, don't ask? So I just left it. Now, it wasn't until later, much later, when we did our trip, and Stephen and Andy started talking to her. Now, Andy is our co-producer. He spoke Polish, Ukrainian, Russian, and she liked it. It was easier to tell him than it was to tell
Because
me.
he wasn't in a family.
It wasn't family. So that's how we finally got the final story. And then Stephen, you talked to her too.
What happened to me, you don't want to know, is such an interesting phrase because I was thinking about the way you depict violence. You don't usually. It's, like what's the thinking behind that? Like we don't see violence against animals, it's done with sound effects. The worst of the sexual abuse is not seen. A lot of the violence is shown from a distance. It's still shocking, but there's a lot of movies on this subject that go way further than this.
Steve did that.
It kind of goes back to your earlier question of how knowing where to lean in more or pull back. The truth is I didn't. There were times. The film was made entirely in Poland, in northeast Poland, about 30 kilometers from the Belarusian border. Mickey and Andy came over a few trips, but for the most part, I was the only American on the crew, and had an incredible experience over there. But oftentimes, after filming all day, I would come back to the hotel and would get on the phone and talk to Mickey and Andy, mainly Mickey, and try to assure him that, I promise you, this is going to be done sensitively. But the truth is I would often say to my producer there, some of the people that were on the crew, I don't know if we're showing enough. This is a war movie. I was worried that it didn't have enough brutality in it. But ultimately, my thought process was, because this is staying true to Sarah's account, the war did not visit the farm much. It was removed from much of, the initial wave came through of the Einsatzgruppen and the assassinations early on. But then, they were able to subsist there. And it would have been inauthentic for it to have, suddenly have all of this happening at the farm. So what I did is the few scenes where there is war, I tried to make them brutal. I tried to show, the execution scene clearly. And so that's sort of what my approach to it is that the stuff, when it did come in. And then to your most recent question, something was ringing in my head often that what Spielberg said when he was making Jaws, that because the shark didn't work that much, they were always trying to get this damn thing to work, they would have to shoot other stuff. And he realized that it was more terrifying to not see the shark, to see the reactions to the shark, to see the moments in between. And I tried to kind of do that as well. Oftentimes what you don't see ends up being more terrifying. And lastly, specifically like the rape scene, this was obviously a very sensitive subject. It was something that Mickey was not aware of. The family was not aware of that this happened to her. I had to call Mickey and say, listen, Mickey, I was just made aware of this. I'd like to put it into the film. And to his credit, he gave me an enormous amount of autonomy and trust to do it. And I said, it will be done sensitively. Oftentimes I think, especially sexual violence, is way too gratuitous. And it didn't need to be. And that's something, I guess, I'm most proud of, that it is done in a very sensitive way.
Wow, thank you.
Fine job. Fine.
And I do think the war outside that you can't see is much more terrifying than the war going on in your front yard. It's much more terrifying. So we have questions in the back there.
I just want to say thank you so much for this film. My first time seeing it, and I definitely will be seeing it again. Lots of little things that I want to be able to watch again. My particular question, though, is can you tell me more about the particular scene, the New Year scene, with Malanka, and specifically that aspect where they're looking for the Jew? What was that about?
So this is actually an example of something that we invented in terms of Sarah's story. She never once mentioned Malanka to me. Malanka is the New Year celebration on the Ukrainian or Orthodox calendar. And they go around and it's almost like caroling. They go house to house and they throw grain, and there's a number of different characters. And one of the characters is a moneylender, a Jew, a stereotypical Hasidic Jew. When I was doing my research prior to even writing the script, I did 2 trips to Ukraine, and in another kind of arcane documentary, I learned about Malanka, and we knew that Sara lived, that the family was religious. We knew that they went to church every Sunday. We knew they would have had to have celebrated this festival, Malanka, and I just felt as though we needed to interject something at that moment in the film, and that in spite of the fact that there is war, happening outside, not everything in life ceases, and certainly, this is from a different perspective when you're talking about the Ukrainians versus the Jews, but the Ukrainians were still allowed to practice their religion, and so I just felt as though, wow, what a provocative moment that would be if a Jew who was masquerading as a Gentile was cast as the role of the moneylender. And so that was the thinking behind that.
I have a question down to your left here.
I wanted to compliment the acting in the film. It's really terrific. And I was just wondering, Mickey, from your perspective, what was it like to cast for the character of your mother?
Well, Steve did a great job. He interviewed 600 girls. 600. And we got down to 2. And our star was number 2 for me, but number 1 for him. And we went at it for a while. The girl that I chose was more animated. She was shorter. She looked more like my mother. This was a tall girl. My mother was small. And we fought for this. We fought over this. And he won, thank God, because she was perfect. She was. She deserves it. She just made 2 more movies.
Yes, I'll just add on quickly. Susanna had never acted before. We initially started casting professional actresses all over Europe, didn't find anybody that fit the bill. Then we did an open casting call, as Mickey said. We went to 6 different cities in Poland. Anybody could come, put up flyers, Facebook posts. The majority of them, obviously, 2 minutes after walking in, I could tell that they didn't have the chops, but we narrowed it down to these 2 young women. We stuck both of them in English class and acting class. I took both of them to Auschwitz for them to get a Polish kind of tour over there. They had never been. And then ultimately screen tested them, and that's what the story that Mickey tells. I was confident that Susanna was right for the role because, to me, she was the fulcrum of the film, and everything that I was saying earlier about staying away from sentimentality or melodrama. Susanna was playing Susanna for the bulk of the film. That's who she was when she walked in. When I first saw her tape, I called my wife over and said, honey, we just found this. Look at this girl. Look at this girl. She communicated so much through her eyes without having to say much. There's only about 5 scenes in the film where she's playing her true identity or where she's emotional. And I basically structured the shooting of the film that those were done later in the filming process when she was more comfortable with filmmaking and having 100 people around you. The early scenes were all things that was just her that she was comfortable doing.
It's funny. Our star never played in anything, ever. First role. Our producer never made a full-length feature. And I never produced a movie.
You guys did all right.
I think so.
Thank you. Thank you.
Beginner's luck.
We have time for one more question in the balcony in the center.
Thank you so much for this movie. I was thinking about this in terms of the first movie we saw and the strength that it takes to live in such a hard world and the what kind of person can survive. And two scenes really resonated with me because I have family members who are survivors. The scene with the mother telling her that to survive is revenge, and the scene where she's with the partisan in the forest and he says, you know, you can't let vengeance take over your life. You have to engage in violence as you need it, but no more than that. And so I was wondering, Mickey, if you could tell us a little bit about Sara's perspective after the war and how she managed to continue surviving, knowing kind of all the terrible things that had happened, but without sort of engage. It didn't seem like she had vengeance in her heart at the end.
She survived after the war by being stoic, being careful, the same way she survived during the war. And it made her very, very limited socially. She didn't accept people. She was afraid of people. She was a good mother. She was a good wife, but the outside world scared her. And with well reason, she saw what happened. And it was hard. It was hard on her. It was hard on the children. But as she got older, then she could open up.
Was she a hard person?
She was tough, you know, no fooling around, but loving, but very loving. And, you know, at 11, when you lose your parents and you lose your family, if you don't get love, it's hard to give love. So it was challenging, but it worked.
Thank you very much. As an educator myself, I really hope that a lot more people get to see this film, a lot more young people get to see this film, because I think there's this strength and there's this history and this power that should be more widely shared with folks. So I really hope that that happens. Thank you all for hanging out with us today.
Thank you.
And thank you for the film, Bill. Thank you for being with us.
And there's one thing I forgot locally, because it's really important. I thank you. One of the groups that sponsored this film is the Champaign County Alliance for Inclusion and Respect. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Joyce.
Thanks, Jack.